welcome. It's my great pleasure to have Anne-Marie Imafidon here. She is CEO, well, head of Stemettes, whatever. And what I'd like to do, and she's very graciously agreed to get going straight away without catching breath, is find out a bit about how her life went from growing up in East London to running this fantastic program, getting girls into coding, girls and young women. So, East London.
Yes, best place on earth.
Okay, well, some of us like
After
Cambridge.
maybe, you know.
Yeah. But you had, I mean, your academic record shows that you showed signs of immense interest in maths and scientific stuff from a very early age. How did that come about?
So it's maths and it's logical things, I think, is the way I'd summarise it. I was fascinated. So, East London, it was the 90s, we had all kinds of things at home that I was fascinated by. I remember we had a washing machine at home. And I remember thinking if we were going to wash things by hand, the motion that we would make and we would do is very different from what the washing machine looks like it's doing. I also remember our VCR player. And, looking around the room, some of us here will remember VCR players. A couple might not. I was at a school this morning, which is another nightmare journey getting to that school, but it was pretty funny, looking at them and saying VCR players and kind of blank faces, and then saying it's like DVD players, blank faces. It's like Blu-ray, blank faces, and then Netflix. Everyone went, yeah! And so, I remember you had the black cuboid cassette tape that you'd put in the bigger cuboid VCR player, and Timon and Pumbaa would show up on a giant box, right, nearby in the room, and thinking, where? How did it know? They weren't on the sticker. It always plays it in the same order. How does that work? And so I took apart the cassette tape, didn't find what I was looking for, and then took apart the VCR player.
And you were how old?
Oh, about 7 maybe? 6, really young. And I just wanted to know how, why, and I'm really thankful to my dad that he didn't kill me, because I know if anybody had taken apart any of my devices at this point, I would. But, for me, that was it. It was how does that work? It's repeatable. And so there's a logic in this. And if I can understand that logic, I can then apply that in other places. And what could I make based on that logic? And so for me, that was the grip, that was the appeal. And it's still the reliability. Maths is so reliable in a way that many other things
But a VCR
aren't.
a VCR and maths aren't identical. So how did you make the connection between I am taking this thing to pieces and maths?
So I don't know that I made that connection immediately. I think it's still a logic. There's a logic in it, and the connection was that it still is repeatable. It still is very logical, right? It follows the same logic. You rewind the cassette tape and you start from the beginning and it does it again. And maths, it's the same thing. We're going to do the addition, that motion of addition, that process of addition is repeatable, and it always does the same thing. 2 + 2 is always 4 for those values of 2, right? And I think that's it. It's you follow the process. If you want to do an average, if you want to find the mean, you always add all them up and you divide them, and that always works. And if you have the same set of numbers, the mean will always be the same. And if you have the same cassette tape, the Lion King will always show in the same way. And I think for me it was, okay, if I can understand that deterministic, right, element of things, I quite enjoyed that. And there's reliability in it. It makes sense. And it always makes sense. And I think that was what it was for me.
Indeed, but there's quite a gap between that and doing whatever it was, computing A-level at 11 or something.
It's not that big a gap. It's not that big a gap at all. If you look across the curriculum, it all builds. This is what they say. This is why they say you need the foundations in order to do the next thing. And so it was, okay, that was logical. What's the next logical bit that I add and that we expand on? And so then there are other things that fit in, and computer science is logical. History is not logical. No offense at all to any historians. Human beings are famously irrational, right? And English is not logical. It's not. You can have EI before C, all of those things, and it's like none of those are rules. With the 13 etroverbs. why? You know? And it's because there's a history, and maybe that bit might be logical, but in every day-to-day use of the French language, why do we have the exception? You don't have exceptions in maths. You just don't.
You've made your point, but nevertheless, you had to have access to everything you needed in order to do that. Your school cannot have been set up to do.
No.
So how did that happen? Understanding parents who didn't kill you, good.
Yeah.
But there's more to it than that.
There's more to it. So what had happened, or the steps, I guess, to get there was, so I really like learning things. I like understanding them. Once I get it and I understand the logic once, I don't need to hear it again because I've got it. That means I didn't get it the first time if I need to hear it again. Maths and the way it's taught at school, like many subjects, it's a lot of repetition, and you repeat and then you build. And at school, it was like, well, if we said that in reception and we're now in year 1, and we said it in year 1 and we're now in year 2, like I heard it the first time, we don't need to do this again. And so it meant that I was like, okay, I already know. So I'm just going to sit here and muck around with my friends. I'm going to bounce off the walls. I'm going to essentially wind my teachers up, not because I want to misbehave, but because it's like, I've got it. Like this is not, let me do something to keep myself engaged. And so I was really, really fortunate in primary school to have teachers that saw that me playing up wasn't me being disruptive or me being on, the path to being suspended or anything like that. It was like, she's bouncing off the walls because she's already got it. Let's give her something else to do. And we had, so our head of maths, head of numeracy at my primary school was a guy called Mr. Davies, who I still haven't found. And I try and say his name as often as I can. So, St. Saviour's in the 90s, Mr. Davies, he was our head of numeracy. And I think it was parents' evening one year. He said to my parents, look, I've heard this thing. Some people have acceleration. Some people, children, get to do things slightly earlier. If they're showing these kinds of signs, it might be something you want to look into because she's driving us potty and her having something else to do might make things a lot easier for everybody involved. And my parents are Nigerian parents. Nigerians are very educated. We love education. And they were like, yeah, fine. Like, let's see where it goes. And I was like, brilliant. Now I don't need to be bored. I can do the things the older kids are doing. My cousin's 4 years older than me and actually came to Sydney, Sussex and did law. I remember she was preparing for GCSEs. And so it was like, oh, okay. I want to watch her TV programs. I want to do the same GESCs that she's doing. Let's go. And so that was how it then stepped up.
You were fortunate because many schools would not have made that possible.
100%.
And also, we talked about this briefly yesterday, but I was bumped up a year at my secondary school, and I was then a social misfit. And you seem to have avoided that, working with your 4-year-old cousin and things. You seem not to have fallen into the trap of, I don't belong, so I'm miserable again. And I find that quite interesting that your experiences were so different, and I was only bumped up 1 year.
Like we were saying the other day, I wonder, I don't know what the difference would have been. I think there's got to be something maybe internally. I saw the whole thing, and I'm not saying you didn't at all, but I saw the whole thing as, this is great for me, because the faster I can do this, the faster I can get on to the next thing.
Oh, I didn't have a problem with the work.
It was the other people, and then for me, it was like, okay, cool. Well, if I'm sat and doing class clown and there are things that I can get ahead of or things that I can, we spoke yesterday about me, using the situation to my advantage where, like I said, my teachers did not like me, did not like this. But starting secondary school, already having a GCSE in maths, meant that my maths lessons at secondary school, doing Key Stage 3 was basically a joke, right? And so it was, the maths teacher would teach whatever it was at the front of the class, and I'd be at the back of the class, and then she'd set the task and the exercises for everybody. And she had a queue at the front of people that wanted help from her, and I had a queue at the back of people that wanted help from me.
But she tolerated that.
Yeah, one way or another. Yeah, maybe that's why she did. Maybe she didn't tolerate it, and I kind of just continued on anyway. And people were like, actually, I like it when Anne-Marie explains it to me, and that was how these things worked. And so, I think for me, it ended up maybe being in some way social currency.
Yes.
That I was like, fine, like if this is going to work, if this means that I don't know, when GCSEs then came around, I helped everyone out. And so I didn't pay for lunch for, a term or longer because of the help that I was giving them. That was it for me. And so people, you're not the first person to ask me. I actually don't know why.
No, well, I mean,
it worked
fantastic.
socially. Yeah.
Luck plays such a large part in our lives in all kinds of random ways. And it's often only when you look back that it's apparent. I mean, you had a primary school that facilitated things and a secondary school which at least did not destroy you. Because I think sometimes if you're sort of, I hesitate to say abnormal, but out of the ordinary, I
would say they tried. My secondary school definitely tried. I ended up going to a different sixth form entirely before I went up to university. And even though it was just for 1 year, because I knew that, and they told me, and they were very overt about it, that if I wanted to apply to Oxbridge from that school, they would not support my application. Yeah, they made that very clear. My head of sixth form laughed in my face when I said I wanted to go up to Oxford to study maths. Yeah. And so I think...
Okay, not always lucky then.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's luck. I wonder if it's... I don't know, maybe I'm a gregarious person. I wonder whether it was, like I said as well, I was used to doing things with people that were slightly older in a lot of different spaces, whether it was at church, whether it was with the exams and all the rest of it. And so it wasn't that big of a jump for me to then be part of those classes and part of those cohorts. And as I said, it's still something I have now in adulthood. There's a lot of boards and things that I sit on where people are twice my age, even at the big old age that I am now. And for me, then that's just normal. Like there's always an age differential, and it's just something that I've had to
one day
learn
will
to
hit
work
you.
with.
You're not the youngest
I
person.
know. I mean, often at Stemettes events, I'm not.
Well,
trying to talk,
true.
Trying to talk to them about Blu-rays this morning, and them giving me blank faces and VCRs. Like I get it quite a lot actually.
Yeah,
so
no, I can imagine.
I think I do. It's a good question, and maybe it's more that we need to do some research into why I was able to adjust in some way, but I think, I don't know the answer. Sorry, apologies, audience. I don't know the answer to that one.
Well, that's fine. The fact that you showed enough resilience when you were having people laugh in your face and you found a solution because you did go to Oxford. Did you enjoy it there?
I loved it. I know it's hard for me to say that here, isn't it? Just that Cambridge is the best place on earth. I mean, I love being at Oxford. I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed that there was a city, and so there was some sense of perspective as we were studying and going about life. We could see this is what town versus gown, I guess we call it, but we could see them. I enjoyed the day-to-day of it all. I had a really, really positive experience, and I know, we can call this one luck, definitely. I know there are a lot of folks who don't have great experiences, often in academic spaces. I was the youngest, I was the blackest, I was the East Londonist, in my cohort. But even with all of those, I wasn't made to feel other along those lines. It was different lines, if I was ever going to feel like other, that I felt like other.
You did not feel, because, the media love to write things about how awful Oxbridge is when it comes to race and things like that. You didn't feel that.
So it wasn't the majority of my experience, and I didn't feel it in college. I didn't feel it in college, and I didn't feel it on my course. There were definitely incidents that I had when, I'd be in other colleges, I'd be meeting other people, I'd be doing other things, and, I won't name names, but there were particular colleges that, every time I turned up, I'd have, trouble from the porters every single time. I had friends who had troubles from their own porters in colleges that they were living in. There was one time we went to a different college even, who we'd gone in as a couple of friends to cook some food, have some food in the TV room. A couple of students had come in and then left immediately. And then about 5 minutes later, the porter came back and was like, and saw my friend and was like, oh, brilliant, Hannah, you're here. Oh, okay, cool. Someone had come and said that there are people that weren't supposed to be here, on site. Yeah. And so there are things like that you witness or that you see. I had friends who had it in their courses, more on the biology end and some of the science end of, black people have smaller brains, or and that was things that was in the curriculum that they had to learn and they had to write as part of their exams. But the course that I was studying, the experience I had, that didn't come up. That wasn't part of what we were going through in the maths and computer science. It wasn't a part of my experience at Keble, and it wasn't overtly a part of that wider experience. And I think I always end up, half joking, but not really, that So my senior tutor, rest his soul, Stephen Cameron, was the academic sponsor for the Oxford University Bell Ringing Society.
Bowling Society.
Bell ringing.
Bell ringing, sorry.
And there's a guy in the year above me, Matt and Comp, who was also a member of the Bell Ringing Society, and someone in my year who was a member of the Bell Ringing Society. And so you'd be in tutes or you'd be in sessions with them, and bell ringing would end up being the analogies that everyone was drawing. And then I would feel like other, because up until that point, I didn't realise bell ringing was a hobby. I'd grown up in East London. Bow Bell's very famous, but I'd never ever thought that there was someone that would ring the Bow Bells, let alone meet them, spend time with them, have to study alongside them. And so that was how I felt other, not because anyone had made a comment about me being black or me being young or me being the girl in that space. As I said as well to you yesterday, in my cohort at Keble, and one of the girls actually is one of the directors at Stemettes alongside me now as well, but we were almost half actually in the maths and the computer science cohort.
Would not be true in Cambridge, I think.
And so so for me, I had a really good experience. I wasn't made to feel like other. I loved it. I love college. I love my college parents. I loved the whole thing. It's partly why I agreed to come back and be an honorary fellow. I actually cried when I saw the note and the message coming through, because it was like, yeah, those were really good times for me. But we go back to that luck thing. I do appreciate that that's not. There would have been other people in other colleges at the same time that wouldn't have had the same experience.
No, and I think, we're talking 10, 12, 15 years later. I suspect that hasn't changed radically, that it's variable experience, but
yes,
your comments about porters is certainly something that I've heard. I'd like to think not in this college, but it's still prevalent and there is work to be done. And of course, intersectionality, being a female mathematician as well as black, potentially could make it much harder.
It definitely could, and I think the trouble at Oxbridge is that it is college and department where you have those kind of risks, right? Whereas in other spaces, it's maybe less that. It's maybe from you've got fewer kind of factors or fewer kind of dimensions to grapple with. And so still a lot of work that needs to be done. Yeah. A lot of prioritization we need to maybe put on this, just given that we're doing so much on access, doing so much on admissions, doing so much on that end, that we need to do a little bit more on the retention and what we're doing to make folks feel welcome in our spaces.
Yes, I think that is a conversation that is had, but probably not everywhere. And certainly there is no point bringing people. There's similar comments about people from the north of England and their accents and made to feel other. I know this college prides itself on its sense of community and inclusion, but I am sure there are instances, and one would hope just not very many, where othering still happens, and it can happen in so many different ways. And it can really destroy an experience. Anyhow, we should move on to happier things, because clearly that's not what happened to you. You went from Oxford to a bank, I think?
I did.
Was that something you aspired to from an early age?
Not necessarily. So my mum says, when I was really young, I enjoyed watching the Weather Ladies on the TV. And so she thought that would be what I maybe ended up doing. When I was 13, we had this thing called Connections, which was our kind of career service thing at that point. And it was brilliant. It's one of the things that, if I had the purse strings or whatever, I'd bring back, because it was careers, advice, linked to discounts with shopping and all kinds. It was like it was brilliant. It was like, they know their audience and they've built something great. And I ended up doing one of these career surveys that asks you kind of maybe 60 or 50 questions. And, do you like working outside? Do you like working with numbers? All that kind of stuff. And it spat out two options for me. It spat out more than that, but the top one was management consultant. The second one was systems analyst. And age 13, I hadn't heard of either, didn't really know what they were.
They wouldn't give much away by that title.
No, right? But again, Connections was brilliant. And so there was a little dossier attached to both of them. And so I read the management consultant one, saw what they did. I was like, okay, cool, makes sense. Maybe I could be a management consultant for Sainsbury's, get free groceries.
You may notice that food does feature.
It does, yeah. And so I was like, that would be really handy. And then saw how much they were paid. and thought, yeah, brilliant, sorted, management consultant at 13, having never met one, but this dossier said it all. The dossier also said, interestingly, and it's so funny to think, what it was that they were kind of putting in our hands, you're something like 16 or 18 times more likely to become a management consultant if you have an Oxford degree, as well at that. And so I thought, brilliant. So maybe Oxford would be a useful thing to do if I'm going to be on this path. I was as a young black woman from East London, I was invited to be part of something called the Windsor Fellowship.
Oh, yes.
That was set up as a response to the Brixton riots in the 80s. And so I was on that programme for a while from about year 9. And they had a partnership with Deutsche Bank, the I Have a Dream internship that they ran. And so I ended up interning at Deutsche Bank age 16. And thought, okay, this is interesting. I did 4 or 5 weeks in the bank. I had 4 figures in my bank account for the first time in my life.
At 16, that's not bad.
16, it was just over £1,000. And I thought, wow, this is cool. Maybe there's a management consultant thing for banking, which of course there is. And so at 16, that's what I thought I was going to do. Turned 17, went up to Oxford and started doing internships to kind of see what are the different bits around management consulting in the bank that I could do. And so it was almost like every 3 years it would kind of change. And so by the time I graduated, I already had job offers, as many do, actually, studying up here, doing maths and comp. And so ended up working at the bank.
Right.
And I returned to the bank. So for me, it was like a return back to where I already
You went
knew.
back to Deutsche Bank?
I went back to Deutsche, yeah, having worked at other places.
But in London?
In London, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because careers advice is something that has rather been forced out of the school system because of cuts in money. I will tell you a story about Michael Gove. At one point, I attended a dinner with Michael Gove when he was Secretary of State for Education. And it was with a right-wing think tank, and I was representing the Royal Society because I was chair of their education committee, not because I was a member of a right-wing think tank. And we each like to ask one question. And I said, what are you going to do about careers? So this would have been maybe 10 years ago, something like that. Because everything was getting cut. And he said, any self-respecting 16-year-old can find what they need on the web. And I thought, supposing you want to be, how do you know you want to be a management consultant without that? And, you wouldn't know the words to put in unless you had someone behind you or a school behind you, a career service, parents, who said, I think you ought to think about being a management consultant. And I just felt, the web is a wonderful thing, but it's just kind of garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, it's not a solution to all of our problems.
No, you need something more than that to get you started. And hearing what they did for you, I believe careers advice has got better in schools again. I don't know if your experience is that because you're much closer to schools.
Yeah, I
don't.
No. It's still severely underfunded. It's still something that is not necessarily prioritised unless the school has a really visionary head teacher. And not every school has a visionary head teacher or the spare resources, because it's a spare resource. It's not a subject.
It is resource intensive.
And so it's not where it should be.
No. I mean, I think it's just slightly better than it was at its worst. That's
possibly. Yeah.
Okay, so Deutsche Bank, making pots of money by this point, presumably. Able to get your...
I once got in trouble for disclosing my salary to someone who was right. I mean, I don't work there anymore, so I won't get in trouble at this point. But I actually once got called in. I don't know if Elder knows this. I once got called in and got in trouble because I had spoken to an author of a book who was writing about work or something like modern work, and she ended up profiling me after I started Stemettes because I was working at the bank and running an organisation, and as part of the conversation, I mentioned how much I earned, and that was printed in the book. And the book happened to be reviewed by the FT, and my name was mentioned in the review in the FT. And so it was passed kind of around the bank, and people were really pleased to see it. And there was one person in particular that was in my direct line, so I got called in and got told off for disclosing my salary, which I thought was really interesting.
I guess they're highly competitive, and
I have no idea. I mean, it's funny you say highly competitive. We see a lot. Deutsche is not necessarily just the ones that do this, but you see a lot of kind of pound competitive on job listings these days. That I always find quite funny because it's like, what's that? What's 4.5 times competitive for the mortgage you could get on a competitive salary?
Yes, well, of course, academics have a different perspective of things. So we better not continue that line either. But Deutsche Bank, I mean, at some point you decided to get out of Deutsche Bank, but as you say, you were doing Stemettes in parallel for a while. So for people who don't know what Stemettes is, perhaps you can give a bit of an introduction to it.
Sure. So Stemettes is a social enterprise that works with young women and non-binary young people aged 5 up to 25 to engage, inform and connect them to the STEM fields, being science, technology, engineering and maths fields, and the STEAM fields, being science, technology, engineering, arts and maths fields, by showing them diversity of options and of people that there are across the industry. And for us, we count industry as academia, entrepreneurship, and of course the business, big business.
Normal industry,
yeah.
And so you're not just doing coding now?
No, not coding. I mean, we started with coding. It was so funny at the school this morning. We're talking to one of the girls who's really interested in chemistry, and then she added computational chemistry, and I was like, yeah, brilliant. She was like, yeah, because we're having to. She learnt from the web that a lot of chemistry now people are having to learn computer science in order to build certain simulations and the rest of it. And so I think I've always had the lean towards computer science, knowing that now there's so much that it enables across the entire STEM world. And so coding has definitely been a big part of what we do. But actually the entire thing really is about technical knowledge of any kind and the right kind of environment and the right kind of people that can inspire that growth in technical knowledge. So we do have chemists, we do have biologists, we do work with energy companies, all manner of folks that are across that STEM church.
And I'm sorry, I probably should have done a lot more homework, but are you having the same group of girls come back every week? Or because I know you do a lot of work in schools, you go and give one off. The last time we met, I think, was in Brighton when we were both at some event.
Yes.
And there are different models. You can either go and do lots of one-offs to large numbers, or have a smaller number who come back week after week, and therefore get a more, I think coherence is the wrong word, but sort of consolidated.
Yeah. So we do all of the above.
You do.
We actually have it on a bit of a pyramid.
Right.
As Athena said, I do like food. So if you imagine the food pyramid,
that's what you talked about in Brighton. That's what I remember.
Imagine the food pyramid, where you have kind of sweets and meat at the top and then carbs and then veg. For us, we see we call them cohorts. So these are the longer term programs. Right. So this is the mentoring for kind of 4 months plus. This is school clubs for kind of 10 weeks. This is certification academies we do over half terms, that again for kind of a longer period of time. So we have those longer term interventions. Then the carbs is the events. So these are the hackathons or the panel events, or where it's a school trip. So it's a kind of quick dip in and out. And then we have the greenery, which is the kind of content. So this is not quite the connections, but this is the zine, our online kind of advice portal. This is our newsletters. This is the things that we put out on socials, the podcast now as well that we have. So for us, the idea is that you kind of start with the greens, you add carbs to your plate, you have a bit of meat, and every now and then the idea is you kind of come at the top of the pyramid into industry, or having made an informed decision on where you sit across the STEM field. And so for us, we do have folks that repeat. We do have folks that dip in and out, and then we do have folks that actually are just online engagement only. But we try and be that one-stop shop and trusted advisor on these things, and resource. And we do have people sending SOS messages every now and then, kind of completely out of the blue. We have people returning. At the school I was at this morning, they invited a couple of them back who have been on our programs over the years, and that's quite nice to sit with them. And often, actually, they'll come back. We've got a youth board as well. We've got a junior board too, and members of the youth board have been ones that have been through those events over the last 10 years, events and programs over the last 10 years. So it's a real mix. And I think for us, we've had to be flexible because life is complicated. Mm-hmm. Life as a teenager, as a young person these days is also very complicated. Yeah. Life happens. And so actually, for the idea of us saying, no, you must sign up and be here the whole time, whatever, doesn't quite work for everybody. Whereas there are others who, this is their solace, this is their safe space. It's their only safe space because they don't have it in the classroom, they don't have it elsewhere. And so we do then provide those services as well.
And how many girls do you think you're reaching?
So over the 10 years, it's about over 60,000 are kind of the estimates that we have, but that's of people that we've actually seen at things, bums on seats, rather than including Instagram
virtual,
lives and all the rest of that kind of virtual side of stuff. Yeah.
That's quite a number.
It is, yeah. It's overwhelming to think of, but if I sit and play the VCR cassette tape, I can see how it kind of has come together over the years.
And presumably it mushrooms too, because word of mouth and all that. Is that, I mean, are you at capacity, or is it just a case of money and resources, and then you could multiply up?
It's both. So I think for us, we have money and resources to support a lot of people in some way. And as time goes on and as it mushrooms, it grows, and companies and organizations are always like, okay, cool, I've heard good things from so-and-so, maybe we can support.
Yeah.
We have alum who then go into industry, who then, bring their companies back. And so it's a nice balance, actually. It swings sometimes. The pandemic swung it one way where we had a lot more demand than supply because companies weren't there anymore, then it swings back. And so it swings up and down. But I think it's nice to think, though, that for the demand that we have at the moment, we have enough resource, enough programs, enough of a network actually to serve those young people.
That's brilliant. So how did you get there? We've sort of jumped over.
Yeah.
How did you conceive of Stemettes, and how did you square it? First of all, doing it parallel with the bank, and then leaving and just doing this. It must have been quite risky.
Well, I tried to I de-risked it as much as I could by the time I did leave the bank. But I was having a good time at the bank. I was really enjoying myself, enjoying what I was doing. I was being listened to, I was being valued, I was being promoted. And I ended up, one way or another, speaking on behalf of the bank at a tech conference in the States. And this was the end of 2012. And I rocked up at this conference. It's called the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. That year, there were 3,500 technical women in the building. You can kind of see everyone as it's registering. You can see everybody streaming past as it's all happening. And I remember feeling, wow, I've always been a female technical person, but I've never seen female technicality on this scale. And it was quite life-affirming, actually. It's something I hadn't noticed. Going through being at Oxford, there were 3 of us in our computer science lectures. So when I say there were a lot of us, it was because I was with Mathmos quite a lot. But in lectures, it was me, Clarice, and Karina for 4 years. In fact, Karina left in the 3rd year, so 4th year, it was just me and Clarice.
Out of?
70, about 70 across the university. We, at work, if you'd have looked in at the kind of glass windows in all the meetings I was in, you'd have seen that I was the odd one out in quite a lot of those meetings. And I'd never noticed, I'd never seen it, or like I said, been made to feel like other, but being in that space, 3,500 technical women, it's, oh my goodness, like I'm one of these people, like there's so many of us, and this is what it's like when we're talking, I don't know, data science, all together, and it's just us here, and wow, like what a sensation. I look back and it was almost like London Fashion Week. People see that and they think the glamour and the glitz and the whatever and flashing light bulbs, and it felt like that because all the big tech companies were there and certain universities were there and everybody was, oh, I love your work. It was amazing. And I thought, wow, this is great. If I had this earlier, maybe, I would have got to where I wanted to be in life even quicker. I mean, maybe we don't need the pace, but, for me, it was incredible to be in that space. There was a keynote, as you have at these things, a lady called Nora Denzel, who was on the board or something at Intuit, and she spoke from the American perspective about proportions of women in STEM, about the fact that they were a shrinking minority, about the fact they've been freefall, and her message was, hey, all of you stay, and all of you recruit one friend, and we can reverse the trend. Like if we do that, again and again, we mushroom, then it can work. And I remember being sat there thinking, oh, goodness, maybe this is an American problem. I've never heard of STEM. I've only just realized I'm a woman in tech. Like, I wonder if this is just an American thing. And this was just at the time that the Institute of Physics had put out their No Girl Left Behind report. And so I kind of read a little bit more into it and was like, oh, goodness, no, not an American problem. We have a little bit of this here too. What would happen if I brought this feeling to these young women, formative time of their life, so they could at least go through the process, go through the system, not feeling so alone, not feeling like they were the only, not feeling isolated in a way that many people often do.
Yes.
and not necessarily in ways that I felt, but knowing that it's not just about having Anne-Marie in STEM. We should have lots of different types of people engaged. And so got back to the UK, spoke to a couple of people. Was like, what do you think of this? How do we do? And so that was it. It was like, okay, cool. New Year's resolution, 2013. Other people said that they were going to do more yoga. I said I was going to do Stemettes project, and so started. I was a young person at that point, and so was eligible for quite a lot of different small pots of funding. And so kind of gathered them together, spent the money on unlimited pancakes because it was Feb 12th, which that year was Pancake Day. Was at the bottom of Google Campus, which is only recently closed actually, but the big tech hub in London. And was like, let's give this a go. Like, this is what they did at Grace Hopper. This is what I'm going to do on the small scale here in London for young women. And it exploded more than I thought. I was with Gove, who was the then education minister, and David Willits, who was the universities minister at that point, at number 10 by the end of that year.
That's pretty fast progress.
Incredible. I wouldn't, I've guessed, if I was going to plan to meet Michael Gove and David Willits, I don't know why I would, but if I was going to plan, I would have taken a slightly different route. It was initially the Stemettes project. I ended up calling it a monster because there was so much that was going on with it so fast. I mean, I was sat there at number 10, it was Science Girl, and I think Little Miss Geek, and the three of us were sat together in the corner. Belinda, I can't remember which member of the team, it wasn't Heather, maybe Ellie from Science Girl, and myself, and David Willett called us the insurgents in the corner at this round table that they put together. And it was fascinating to think that, I'd hit on something that was a real problem, that was being recognised at a national level, literally, the heart of government as a really big problem, and that I hadn't been arrogant that I definitely had the solution, but in 10 months we'd seen that we'd definitely hit on something that was solving a problem for folks. But, as you said, I had a full-time job. And so at the end of the first year, I was like, okay, this is too much. This monster has taken on a life of its own. I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to stop. I need to... New Year's resolutions, right? Those people probably have forgotten that they said they were going to do yoga, and here I am, lumbered with this organisation. Said I was going to close it down and not do it anymore. There's a little bit of uproar from funders. And so got a proper whack of funding to pay for someone to start working on this. And so I worked at my desk at Deutsche. They worked at a desk nearby. We'd be on the phone in between calls, all that kind of stuff, up and downing. And 2 years in, it was like, I need to sleep sometimes. I need to eat sometimes. This is not good for my sanity. Something had to give. And Stemettes had got to the point there where actually it could have supported me. And so I was like, fine, let's go. Let's go on with it.
And I would like to think you haven't regretted that decision.
No, I don't regret things in general. I feel like I always do the best I can with the information that I have, and that there's no more that really we should expect of ourselves. But I think the only, if we could call it quarter of a regret or tenth of a regret, is that I didn't go sooner.
Oh, okay. So your sanity would have been better if you...
Exactly. I'd have had more sleep, eaten more food, those years. And I think that's the only thing. But no regrets. And I think when I left with the information I had, I knew that I kind of counted upside on one side versus upside on the other. I didn't know that the upside would be, again, I haven't planned any of this. I did not say, if I leave Deutsche, I'll end up on Countdown within 10 years, or that either the Queen would know who I was, or any of that kind of stuff that then ended up happening. It wasn't like, I can sit on, Research England count, like that wasn't it. It was just, there's going to be some sort of upside in the impact that I can have on the next generation, and that will be enough, more than the money I could have made and the impact I would have had on, banks' profits or banks' technology. And that was the premise on which I went, and I think it has paid off.
I think it's really important. I mean, there are many students, if any in the audience, but I always try and say to them, you shouldn't make a life plan and think this is what's going to happen, because it never works like that. And as you say, if you at 13 or 21 even, you'd said, right, my aspiration is to be on Countdown. It wouldn't have seemed very plausible, and you probably couldn't have found the right route into it, and yet there it is. You're not doing it now, are you? No.
Had
enough?
How can you tell? I mean, it was an experience. It's definitely Rachel's job. I mean, I know this is being recorded. I love Rachel, but I don't know why she does it. It's 5 episodes a day, 3 days on the trot. Like it's grueling. It's a lot of work, and it's studio lights, and you don't know what time of day it is. Rachel in particular has to get changed 5 times a day, and it's a full head to toe change. She wears heels. I refuse to wear heels. Yeah. The hosts and Susie only change their tops, and Susie barely changes her top between episodes. And it's not, it's fine. It's the same day, so it's fine. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's a way of life.
Yes.
So one of the previous talks I did in this series was with Alice Roberts, who is on television a lot. And Alice turned up looking very svelte, as she does, in a little black dress or whatever it was, I don't remember. And we handed her a mic, and she just disappeared behind the curtain and sort of slipped it up her dress. I thought, this is a professional. I try to remember to have pockets. And it is just a very different life if you're going to spend all your time appearing on television, which is not something I've had to do very much.
No.
So what's next?
10 years of Stemettes. That's the biggie. That's the big one.
So
that's
next year.
That's February. Celebrating that, and I don't take a lot of time to celebrate things. It looks like I do, and I don't. Other people and other things celebrate what is going on, but it's never me being like, "Hey, let's have a party." To be like, "This is great." So next year is going to be a lot of celebration. Me taking the time to do that.
Right.
Us reflecting on 10 years. Us looking forward on 10 years, and my aim really is redundancy for Stemettes. So I think there's definitely a lot of planning for how do we become redundant? How do we ensure that we're not needed anymore?
We're a long way from that.
Well, I mean, the analogy I give is the suffragettes. Like there was a lot that they were going for, but you pick one change, one nudge, right? One thing, and you're like, okay, cool. Like we've done that one thing, and we can say, okay, we've made a step in the right direction rather than we've sold all of equality across the whole of society. I think we're still figuring the details out of what that would look like for Stemettes, or what would be the things that we're pushing for. And we're working with the young people on that at the moment. They're writing letters, doing research, looking into policy and advocacy things. So I think there's things like something like that would hopefully be the beginning of the end, at least for Stemettes.
Right.
In its current form. I'm supposed to be writing a second book.
You should read her first book.
We've all been
out
8th of September. 8th of September.
Okay.
Ominous date of dates that I could have picked over the last 7 decades to publish a book. 8th of September. That was how I found out the news. My sister, as great as she is, was like, "Oh, Anne-Marie must know that this has happened now. How do we tell her, given that she's on stage at her own launch?" And so she asked a question that started with the news and said, what does that mean for for women being in control or whatever it was? And I was like, great, thanks, Christiana. But anyway, so the book is out. There's supposed to be a second one, so still kind of figuring out what shape that should take based on the response to the first one, based on what I think people should hear or should know, based on what people maybe want to hear from me. So that's up next, and the rest of it, I don't know. I take each month as it comes.
Well, that's a very good philosophy. As long as you don't feel let down when nothing actually changes suddenly. I mean, you have had such a steep trajectory, and reached out into so many different spheres. Do you think you can sustain that?
Oh, I don't want to.
You don't want to?
No.
Okay. Well, that's perhaps the answer then. You've had that bit of your life. Now you want to.
Maybe. I mean, a lot of people don't believe me when I say I do just want to sit still and not do anything and just relax for a minute. My aim in life is to be a hermit and not to leave the house. That's definitely what I'm heading towards. But again, people don't believe me when I say that. But I do genuinely love being at home. My word for the year for 2020 was JOMO. So I have a word for the year rather than New Year's resolution, because last time I had a New Year's resolution, so that's happened. But JOMO, joy of missing out.
Oh, right, yes, of course.
That was my aim for 2020, at the beginning of 2020, before we all knew what obviously eventually happened in 2020. And so I was like, this is brilliant, I'm at home. But the plan wasn't that everybody also should also be at home at the same time. And so I'm an introvert. You might not believe that as well, but I am an introvert. I do like being at home. And so this idea of the trajectory, I take things as they come. There are a lot of options, a lot of choices. And I'm open to that. I'm iterative on that goal, like you were saying, is your advice to folks. And I'm always like, yeah, okay, let's see what comes, but it would be nice to just sit still for a minute.
Well, maybe we should let you have a minute. I'm conscious of the time. There should be time for questions from the floor and also from Zoom. So any of you online, feel free to type in a question. We have roving mics. So questions? I need to get my glasses out so I can read if someone.
Yeah, it's quite small, isn't it? Yeah.
Questions? Do we have one? Excellent.
Thank you very much. Can you? Yeah, it works. So in the beginning, you were really driven by curiosity and your need for logic. And I would have expected you to go on and perhaps become a researcher. Mm-hmm. And so why did you not choose that way?
So I didn't choose that path for a number of reasons. It's a great question. I mean, so when I went up to Oxford, I was struck by the number of people I met who were like, yeah, I've been here for 9 years. You know, and no offense at all to anyone that's been in Cambridge for 9 years or more, but
40 odd.
I think for me it was quite interesting to think, okay, cool, like you came here and it was great, but there was no change, there was no delta, no difference, no movement. And I also say that as someone who's now come back to London and hasn't left, and I'm in East London, not very far from anywhere in my childhood, my school, my parents' house, our family GP. Like the family GP, I think has moved on now, and I'm still, you know, in the same postcode area. I think the idea of staying in research, I did want to stay on. I did want to continue. I did want to be a researcher. I love maths and I find solace in it and the logic of it, but life is more complicated than maths. And I think I've got more distracted with trying to understand the real world than going back to trying to understand, I don't know, stage 2 of Galois theory. Like I think, and I'd love to do that. And I think, you know, when I do sit at home and become a hermit, that is probably what I will end up
Galois theory in particular?
doing. Maybe I thought that was one of my favourite moments at Oxford.
Wasn't he
you
the
know,
one who died in the duel at 21?
they didn't. I didn't. That wasn't on our syllabus, but wasn't part of the bit that we learned. I mean, so for me, humans are not logical and not reliable and not deterministic, and so it's been a harder problem to solve. And so I've got stuck on that rather than going back to what we might call traditional research. I think the other thing is I've never been too far away from academic institutions. And from the outside and from this end, I can see more of the problems and more of the issues than I maybe had appreciated when I finished my master's, let's say the first time, and left Oxford. I think, I don't know that it's a system I'd want to subject myself to. In the person I am, the form I'm in, the things I've done, as well as protected characteristics and the rest of it. The funding landscape, like there's quite a lot that I've ended up being privy to on council. I was privy to before I joined council, and now that I'm in council, I kind of almost see it again. It's like, you know, doing GCSE maths and A-level maths and then university maths, right? And you kind of pull back and you're like, wow,
It just gets more and more complicated.
right? And then you have to do something like analysis, or you have to learn all the theories, and you're like, oh God. And so for me now, it's like, okay, would I want to subject myself to that in its current form? The answer is a big no. And so now I know more, and so there's definitely not a space that I'm going to find myself in until there are particular changes that maybe I could affect, and even then it might not still be then for me to go back in. But a lot of people say that. A lot of people wonder why I don't want to go into politics and become the Prime Minister. Like I get that on Twitter at least once a month. But yeah, it's not. There's a lot of things that are broken in academia in this country that I know enough about that now to know that that's not really something I should be going into.
Peter, do you want to pass the microphone over to Ross?
Oh,
Ross, you had a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. From Galois theory right to the other extreme to sociology, in computer science in Cambridge, as in the rest of Britain, North America, etc., we get about a sixth woman. Mm-hmm. Yet if you go to Romania, it's a third, and if you go to India, it's a half. Mm-hmm. So something's up with the culture. Mm-hmm. What is it, and how do we fix it?
So there's quite a lot that's up with the culture. Great question. Middle East, I thought you were going to head to the Middle East because then it swings completely the other way. And there's lots of things that are up with our culture. Some of them I feel are tweaks that we could make that might be quick wins, and others are a lot bigger, a lot more systemic. Some will say, many have said, the quality of teaching of the subjects at lower levels informs a lot of that. This translates itself in the way that in education policy and how it's set in certain countries. So we have mandatory mathematics up to 16 in this country. Many other places up to 18. You don't really have a choice of your subjects because they have the teachers to support that and allow that to happen. And so then that means that people then make slightly different choices as they go up through the system. The roundtable I was at with Michael Gove and David Willits back in 2013, we were looking at the fact that we didn't have enough physics graduates every year to plug the gap of physics teachers in our system currently. So if you have everyone that graduated in physics in this country and got them to become a physics teacher, you'd still have a gap.
I think you need 10 years worth of every physics graduate.
And that's assuming that there's not other things that you might do as a physics graduate. The way we treat our teachers in this country, culturally, the space that they occupy is very different. I was with a Greek Cypriot a couple of weeks ago who did not know about the problem. We're talking about it. And she was like, "Oh yeah, actually, you know, we've got oodles and oodles of physics teachers in Cyprus that are waiting to kind of step into this." And I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe that could plug the gap here." She's like, "No, they'd never come and be teachers here. Like, it's not the same thing at all, right?" And so I think there's a lot on that front to be done for those educational choices. I don't know that the curriculum's in the right place. I think the other thing that we have, which someone's done the research on, is the way that the economy works, and culturally the way that things are here. In certain countries, as a child, you're meant to make the money to pay for family and look after people into their old age and the rest of it. Culturally, that's not really necessarily what we ask our youth to do here. And so in other places, in somewhere like India or wherever it's Romania, like the amount of money you can earn and that you know you can earn in that place means that you can fulfill your duty as a child. And so people then go ahead and do it whatever gender that they are. I have heard, I won't name any countries, about dowry being increased if you study particular subjects. So that's something I've seen. Other countries I've seen where it's culturally easier or it's more acceptable for the men to go and study abroad. And so the women study locally. And so that's why the proportions then are much higher in higher education on those subjects. And so it looks like the same thing, but actually it's slightly different in different places. So I think for us, what do we need to change? I think because of the way our culture works, I think the biggest lever would be telling the very, very rich technical history that we have to as many people as possible. Like if people knew that the 60s was not just Twiggy and miniskirts. I wasn't there, I'm looking at Athene, I'm sure you weren't there, Athene, but you know, it wasn't just Twiggy and miniskirts. Like there were women who were working from home who were building the flight receiver for Concorde, who were doing stock control systems, or building time like no one tells that story. We still haven't seen. Steve Shirley told me that they've sold the rights to make that movie. We still haven't seen that movie.
No, I mean her book is out there.
Her book is out there, but the movie isn't, and the movie is the thing that kind of
that will catch people's imagination,
yeah. Like Hidden Figures did. And so
yes.
like there's all these stories of people. Every time we connect to Wi-Fi, no one thinks of Hedy Lamarr.
No.
Every time you follow the blue dot, no one thinks of Gladys West. Gladys West is still alive. Right? We gave the Queen Elizabeth Prize 2 years ago to someone completely different. Gladys West, the West Virginia mathematician who worked on those satellites, did the mathematics to figure out how GPS works, is still alive. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody knows her story. And so things like that, if you know that, then who's the other one that I was going to say? Not Hedy Lamarr. No, it was Hedy Lamarr, actually.
Hedy Lamarr did
Hedy Lamarr with the Wi-Fi. You know, it's not safe for kids, so don't watch it with your kids, but Bombshell was the documentary about her life that has recordings from her. And, you know, this is someone who was a Hollywood actress. She's, you know...
described as the most beautiful woman in the world.
Most beautiful in the world. And so Betty Boop was based on her, the character. Everyone knows Betty Boop. Nobody knows Hedy Lamarr. And
not as an inventor.
No, not as an inventor. And that is, I mean, the film is actually really hard to watch, actually, towards the end, because they were like, just shut up and say your lines, just shut up and look pretty. And this is someone who, you know, had a patent that timed out. on frequency hopping, spread spectrum technology, which is what underpins Wi-Fi and Bluetooth.
And interesting, her co-investigator was that he's known as a composer.
But we don't tell these stories.
No, well,
and so you feel like it's a certain set of people and it's a certain narrative that should be here. I mean, the joke I have, and whether people like it or not, is you have to be dead and white and male and have a beard to be successful in this space. And that's a really high bar. And no offence at all to anyone who is dead and white and male and has a beard.
Don't think there are any in the audience.
Right? Or people that might end up, but I'm never going to be a dead white guy with a beard. And so does that mean there's nothing that I can contribute? And so we have these things. And so that, in this country, if we had that, there's so many things that we hold on to.
Like
we still think we're great at football because of the story we tell.
No, the World Cup's
It starts on Sunday, I know, and they've run the models, so there's 5.7, I think, % chance we have of winning, apparently, because you can believe the algorithms.
But the one thing I will say that gives me some hope about remembering women is when I was growing up, and I was in a quite musical family, the only women one ever heard about, female composers, were Clara Schumann, who was, of course, Robert Schumann's wife, and Fanny Mendelssohn, who was Felix Mendelssohn's sister. They got talked about. If you listen to Radio 3 now, they have women all the time. There were loads of women. It has completely transformed. Maybe that will happen with the Hedy Lamars of this world.
Here's hoping. It's happened for medicine. So, we've seen it. So it can be done.
It can be done. And it does need more and more of those stories being put out. And people like you, there are lots of stories on the web if you can find them, but it's got to be mainstream.
Yes,
it's got to be in the curriculum. So to go back to our friends Michael Gove and David Willits, I was in a meeting with David Willits and Nick Gibb, who was and now is again a schools minister.
Oh, really? He's back again.
Or has he gone? I can't remember. I think maybe he was in Liz Truss's and has gone again. I can't remember. Anyhow, and there were a whole group of us from different professional bodies saying, why are there no women in the science curriculum?
Exactly.
I mean, it is just outrageous that still, and as far as I know, that would have been 10, 12 years ago.
It's the same. It's the same now, I think.
And it's not that difficult to find women to put in the science curriculum.
Yeah.
I mean, Marie Curie,
yeah.
I mean, we can do better than, not better than that,
no,
but more diverse than that, additional.
But it's the power of stories, right? So football will still come home eventually, because in 1966 we won it, right?
I remember that.
Okay. Oh, do you? But it's one of those ones where it's like the power of those kinds of stories in a country like this goes a very long way, and I think it would go a long way to solving part of the problem.
So we should probably move on. There is a question online. I don't know if there are any other. The question online, and I'm not quite sure. How do you manage your paid work and your unpaid work?
Oh gosh, this is a good question. Is there a tactical question? Not very well. How do I manage paid and unpaid? I write about this in the book, actually. I have almost like, and it is constantly evolving, but I almost have like a collaboration matrix. I have like a list of things that I go through, and I'm like, is it this, is it that, is it this, is it that, is it that? And I have like 2 wild cards a month that I'm just going to do it for doing sake and just give it to the universe. And I genuinely expect nothing. Not that I expect much back from anything, but I'm doing it for the good of the world and as my, give forward, pass it forward. But there's a matrix. There's always different things that I'm like, okay, cool. Like, does this make sense? Just because it's paid doesn't mean I will do it. Is it something where it feels exploitative? Is it something where it feels like it's just name for name and there's not really anything deeper to it? Is it someone that I respect? Then it's like, yeah, I'll come. If Athene asks me to be there, I'll be there for Athene. It is what it is, Even if I've been in the car for 2.5 hours, I'll make it out to Cambridge. It's not your fault. You weren't on the road.
There's a drink out there.
There we go. And so there's a list of things that I'm like, okay, cool. Does this work? Does this align? Will this help? Should I be the person there? Should it be someone else? And so there's things that evolve over time, and I share it with the team. I have a team. I have my own team. I have the Stemettes team. And it's like, okay, folks, we're not doing this. This is just not a company we will do something with. This is an award I'm not going to take, actually, because that company's on it. And we're not doing that. That's cool. I've never been to Malaysia. Fine, and I was in Malaysia last week. And so there's a matrix of things that evolve over time as life goes. And like you said, we're in peaks and troughs. And so sometimes it'll be like, yeah, I've got the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I'll do unpaid. But it evolves, and as time goes on, that capacity for paid work also changes very much in nature. And so it is something still I'm struggling even with the TV work versus everything else. Daytime TV, you do for the love, you don't, it really doesn't pay.
No, I have heard that before.
Yeah.
And it's very demanding on schedule and everything.
And they all feel like they're doing you a favour.
Yes.
I mean, this is being recorded, I guess, over dinner. We can go into more detail, but you know, there was a primetime TV show that came up just as I was recording Countdown, and it was like, and it was like, oh, we'll pay this, and it was like, it's not really worth it, but also you're asking me to take my whole life up and down just because and all of it, and it was like, do you know who you've turned down? It's like, what are you talking about? My mum didn't carry me for 9 months just so I could be on this TV show. Like, if you've sold it to Channel 4 based on me being there without having asked me, then I don't really know
that's not very impressive, no.
And there are a lot of people that I've met since in TV who are like, oh, no, you should have done it. And I'm like, well, no, I don't think I should, And so it's a hard one, but it's a balance. So I'm not saying that I have all the right answers on that at all. And sorry, that was a really waffly answer for the person that asked it on Zoom.
Well,
so let me know if that wasn't, let us know, let Athena know if that wasn't good enough. But it's phases. Life is in phases.
Oh, sorry, they mistyped it, I think.
Oh,
they
oops.
perhaps meant unpaid care work. Refers to women's unpaid care and household work.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so what's the question?
Well, it's two different people, and I can't get them to answer from them.
What's the question about care work?
Well, so the first one was, how do you manage your paid work with unpaid card work? And I couldn't work out what that was. And this person is saying it was care work. So I think they're saying, who cleans the bathroom in your house?
The cleaner.
The cleaner.
The cleaner cleans the bathroom. My mum laughed at me. Anyway, let's not. That's too personal. I mean, it isn't. It isn't. I'm the eldest of 5. There's a sister in the middle who's 8 years to the day younger than me. When I moved into my 2-bed flat in Stratford, as you know, East London, everything's in East London, I got a cleaner because I was at Deutsche as well, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to clean the bathtub, so I'm going to pay somebody to clean the bathtub and pay them fair wage to clean my bathtub because I don't do it. And my mum laughed at me, and she was like, you're in a 2-bed flat on your own, you're paying a cleaner, what are you going to do when you're in a big house? And I was like, I'll still pay a cleaner when I'm in a big house. My sister's 8 years younger than me. She moved into her 2-bed flat on her own to start off with. And guess what my mum offered to buy her for her birthday? A year's worth of cleaning.
It's always tough.
I did say it was
eldest.
personal. It's tough being the eldest.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I have a really supportive partner, and I pay a cleaner who looks after things, and I don't have to do a lot of that stuff. I have an assistant. I have all the help that I can afford to have, which does link a little bit into the unpaid versus paid work.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the answer to that one.
We probably should draw things to a close. Thank you so much for being so open and coping with your 2.5-hour car drive. We will now let you catch breath. There will be drinks outside, and thank you for coming, and thank you to those online. I never looked to see how many there were, but it's lovely to be able to have at least some people back in the room. Good.